Okay, so our disaster was the Deep Horizons oil spill. The Deep Horizons oil spill was a wellhead blowout that happened on a BP-operated ship called the Macondo Prospect. This happened on April 20th of 2010 and lasted until July 15th of 2010 in the Gulf of Mexico. BP is a petroleum company that you may have bought your gas from at one point. 4.9 million barrels, 210 million gallons of oil were spilled over a span of 87 days. The flow rate was 62,000 barrels per day. The disaster took a relatively long time to come to completion. The initial onset was the worst, and the spill was able to be more controlled over time as they understood where the leak was coming from and how they could help contain the oil.
According to satellite images, the spill only directly impacted 68,000 square miles. The explosion was 4,993 feet below the surface. Human and economic loss included 11 human casualties resulting from the explosion itself, and social and economic impacts included over one-third of federal waters in the Gulf of Mexico that were shut down to fisheries because of fears of contamination in the water that will result in unhealthy consumption of fish. 8 to 12,000 became unemployed due to the federal moratorium on offshore drilling instilled by the federal administration, and British Petroleum created $20 billion compensation fund in 2010, and by 2013 the fund was tapped out.
The primary and secondary responses were that using physical barriers, they tried to keep the oil contained in the water. They used skimmer boats to get a majority of the oil cleaned up, and sorbents to absorb most of the oil in the water. This was led by the National Response Team, which is a group of government agencies headed by the U.S. Coast Guard and Environmental Protection Agency.
The recovery time of the oil was that the oil was capped on September 19, 2010. It did not mark the end of the spill, as much of it had not been cleaned up yet. A wellhead blowout is the uncontrolled release of crude oil and or other natural gas from an oil well or gas well after the pressure in controlled systems had failed. So once this had capped, it took a long time to reestablish the correct pressure. The cleanup is still continuing to this day, and even though on April 14th, which is relatively 5 years after the spill, BP claimed that the cleanup was substantially complete. However, the United States Coast Guard claimed otherwise, and that there was a lot of work that remained.
Thanks.